The story opens with Derek, the young protagonist, quietly observing the sprawling city beneath him. A girl's voice breaks the silence, urgently calling for him to get ready. She warns that only 30 seconds remain before the portal activates, and once it does, he'll have only a few minutes to save himself. Unbothered, Derek takes a casual sip of his drink and replies that he understands, completely unfazed by the danger ahead. With effortless confidence, he leaps from the towering building and lands gracefully on the ground. A faint, knowing smile forms on his lips as he remarks that this isn't the first time he's had to rescue his team. Blue lightning erupts around him, wrapping his body in crackling energy. Saving the day and making it back in time for dinner, he says, isn't difficult at all. The white-haired girl scowls at his arrogance, muttering curses under her breath. Behind her, the mage completes her incantation and announces that the portal is fully open. Derek, now clad in full armor, replies calmly, then the time has come. Without hesitation, he steps through the swirling purple gate. Inside, he finds devastation, lava bubbling from a furious volcano, the ground torn apart, and one of his comrades lying gravely injured. More of his team lies scattered as a demon and a colossal dragon loom over them. Derek's expression darkens. He wonders how a supposedly simple mission devolved into such ruin. He rushes forward to help but is quickly surrounded by countless shadowborn creatures. Years later, Derek meditates alone in the endless void. The memory of that tragedy still haunts him. Now older, he reflects bitterly that the mission should have been nothing more than routine. He convinces himself he shouldn't help anyone again. But old habits die hard. Returning to the memory, he hears a friend scream at him to retreat. Sylvie can't hold on any longer. A red-haired girl insists they can't abandon their teammates. But another warrior yells that there's no time left. Derek remembers clearly how he once stood among the strongest system users on the planet. He once believed he could save everyone. Pushing forward, he fought through hordes of monsters to carve a path toward the portal. He grabbed a wounded teammate and urged them to rise, promising he would get them out safely. But in his heart, he knew he was lying. A monstrous creature suddenly appeared and struck his companion with devastating force. Derek froze, horrified. Behind him, the portal began to close. Rage and despair surged through him as he questioned why he ever believed he could save them. He sprinted with everything he had left, reaching for the gate. His hand nearly touched the light, but the portal snapped shut right before him. Derek stared in disbelief at where his hand used to be, unable to comprehend what had happened. Time seemed to halt as reality sank in. In the present, Derek awakens from the nightmare, dropping to his knees in fear and anguish. He wonders if he failed because he wasn't strong enough, or if someone had betrayed him. Gripping his spear tightly, he tries to convince himself the memory is deceiving him. He believes Sylvie and the others must be searching for him. They must be working to open another portal. Any moment now, they'll save him. In the void, he waits. Days blur into months, and months into years. He trains relentlessly, his spear becoming an extension of his own body. He meditates for days on end to keep his sanity intact. He pushes his body beyond its limits, becoming far stronger than he ever imagined. He keeps meditating. He keeps training, all in hope of seeing sunlight again. Then, finally, a strange, foreign sound echoes through the void. A glowing red screen materializes before him, flashing a system error. The system warns that the host is moving out of range. More errors appear, rapidly multiplying. Panic floods Derek as he screams for it to stop. The system begins disconnecting. It urges him to return to range. He cries out desperately, insisting the system is all he has left. But the connection fails. With tears streaming down his face, Derek begs them not to take it away, his last fragment of hope. Overcome with fury, he strikes the ground. No matter how much vitality he burns, no matter how many times his healing rewrites his flesh, he cannot escape. He realizes he can grow stronger, yet the fractures inside him only deepen. Every crack he makes in the void slowly mends itself, as if mocking him. With hollow eyes, Derek finally surrenders. He whispers a plea, to be allowed to die quietly. He had already lost himself once, and now he felt it happening again. As darkness swallows him, the void called. A sharp fracture splits open the fabric of space, the sound reverberating through the void as Derek is violently thrown backward. Dazed, he wonders if this is merely another one of his recurring hallucinations. But the glimmer of the spatial tear reflected in his eye proves it is no illusion. This rift is undeniably real. Unlike the countless cracks he had witnessed before, this one does not seal itself shut. A determined spark ignites in his gaze. Clad in his battered armor, Derek declares that he will escape this cursed prison no matter what awaits him beyond the breach. Extending his hand, he vows he no longer cares where the rift leads, as long as it is anywhere but here. With a deranged, exhausted laugh born from decades of solitude, Derek strikes the fissure with his spear, reckless and uncaring of whatever lurks on the other side. To him, even death is preferable to endless darkness. But then, a scarlet beam erupts from the crack, surging outward with unnatural force. Derek freezes, baffled, moments before the expanding wave of crimson energy slams into him, head-on, launching him backward. Groaning, he clutches his head. This was no hallucination. Something powerful, something capable of breaking his eternal cage, has finally noticed him. A grotesque creature emerges from the rift, its body twisted and covered in countless glowing red eyes. Derek scoffs. That's a hell of a way to greet someone. The monster's jagged smile widens. unblinking and murderous. Straightening, Derek mutters that he'll teach the abomination some manners. He also wonders, almost amused, just how strong he has become without a system to guide him. He charges forward with his spear, lightning gathering in swirls of blue around his body. The monster retaliates instantly, gathering energy for a massive beam. A blinding volley erupts. The creature's energy tears through the void itself. Derek evades the first barrage, but the monster's speed is overwhelming. Realizing he cannot avoid the next strike, he braces, and a colossal explosion detonates, lighting up the void like a dying star. The force hurls Derek across the darkness. Crashing onto the ground, he glares up at the creature and snarls, "You ugly bastard." Holding his head, he whispers that this is definitely not a hallucination. Then something unexpected happens. He feels pain, real pain. For the first time in decades, blood trickles down his hand. Staring at the crimson stain, something in Derek's mind clicks back into place. A twisted smile spreads across his face. The fog is gone. He mutters. Blue lightning cracks violently around him as he rises. If death is another path to freedom, he welcomes it. The monster begins gathering an even more devastating attack, weaving complex energy patterns. Derek digs his heel into the ground, lowering his stance, preparing to charge. After decades trapped in this void, he lunges forward with every ounce of strength he has left. Sanity long since eroded, he clashes with the creature head-on. In that moment of desperation, Derek shatters the limits of his own body. With a fierce, wild expression, he screams at the monster, "Come on, kill me already!" Or, "Get out of my way." Their powers collide in a catastrophic explosion. The impact is so immense that the void itself begins to fracture. Taking advantage of the widening gap, Derek leaps toward the ruptured space, finally sensing a way out. Without a moment's hesitation, he dives headfirst into the light leaking from the crack. A triumphant, almost hysterical smile spreads across his face. He is ready for whatever lies beyond. The monster merely watches as Derek tears through the newly opened portal. For the first time in ages, he steps beyond the bounds of his prison. Laughing with unrestrained joy, Derek emerges from the crack and feels warm sunlight on his skin. He is finally free. Moments earlier, in that same forest, the sky had split apart with a brilliant blue flare. A blonde boy rushed through the trees, terrified he had walked too far from the safety of his village. Before he could turn back, he tripped and tumbled off a cliff, cursing his terrible luck. Dangling on a rocky ledge, the boy stared in shock as the sky above him shattered, a monstrous presence emerging from the break. He froze, convinced his life was about to end. The monster lunged toward the helpless child, and he screamed in raw panic. Clinging desperately to a rock, the boy realized he had barely survived the fall. But when he looked up, a bright column of light descended from the heavens, striking the water below. From within it, Derek burst out, radiating a fearsome blue aura. The terrified boy's eyes widened. He had escaped a wolf, only to witness something far more terrifying. A demon cloaked in lightning now stood before him. At that moment, an error window materialized before Derek's eyes, informing him that an invading system had been detected. Derek stared at the message in confusion, unable to grasp its meaning. The alert shifted again, stating that the threat would be entirely eliminated. Before he could understand, a tremendous force descended from above and hurled him backward, slamming him behind a tree. Derek felt a surge of anger and bewilderment, inwardly demanding to know what was happening to him. From a distance, the blonde boy watched the scene, frozen in fear. A violet beam thundered down from the heavens and struck Derek directly, blasting him into the earth and carving a wide crater around him. Nearby, the wolf that had been chasing the boy staggered to its feet, heavily wounded. It fixated on Derek's still body, cautiously observing from afar. Half-conscious, Derek drifted into memories of the void, of being shattered and trapped endlessly. He wondered silently if everything he once knew had vanished for good. He questioned if his system, his home, and his old life had been erased, or if everything had simply been a delusion born from isolation. His thoughts were cut short when the wolf bit into his arm. Still half asleep, Derek merely wished aloud for a few more minutes of rest, as though the attack were nothing more than a minor annoyance. The wolf, confused, bit down harder. Derek reacted with tired amusement, finding the sensation ticklish rather than painful. The beast, frustrated by his reaction, growled angrily. At last, Derek opened his eyes with a stern expression and mentally commanded the creature to stop. He rose effortlessly, lifting the wolf by the neck with one hand. Watching this, the blonde boy became even more convinced that Derek was not human, but some kind of demon. Derek blinked several times as clarity returned. For a moment, he looked genuinely confused at the struggling creature in his grasp. Then his mood shifted, and he regarded the wolf as if it were a playful puppy seeking attention, holding its paw with amused fascination. Surveying the forest around him, filled with corpses, rot, and decay, Derek found the area strangely beautiful despite its desolation. He wished the wolf would stop making noise. Reality finally settled in. This was no dream. And then, he noticed it. A system screen had returned. But it was not the same as before. The display revealed, Derek level 0, no skills. A wave of concern passed through him as he feared his techniques might truly be gone. He raised his spear and attempted to use his energy slicing skill. Nothing happened. He remained frozen in an awkward stance while the wolf glared at him. He attempted the technique again and again, but nothing changed. A sharp pain pierced his temples. He wondered why the ability refused to activate. Then he remembered the earlier warning about a rogue system being detected. He began to speculate whether his original system had fused with a new one. As he pondered, the wolf bit into his arm once more. Derek sat down beside the creature, contemplating how he had arrived in this strange world. A sudden snap of a twig drew his attention. He became alert, wondering who was nearby. The wolf growled toward the same direction. The blond boy emerged, trembling. He appeared terrified and silently begged not to be harmed, wishing only to return home. Derek, confused by the child's fear, tried to understand what he meant when he assumed Derek was a man-eating demon. Derek found the accusation amusing and wondered what part of him could possibly resemble such a creature. Before he could continue processing, the wolf lunged at the boy. Derek intercepted the beast effortlessly and mentally reprimanded it, while the child concluded that Derek must be insane. Derek then apologized with a gesture and signaled for the child to state his name. The boy introduced himself as Thomas. Curious, Derek indicated for Thomas to reveal his level. Thomas explained with nervous gestures that he was still level 0 since he had not yet turned 13. Derek reacted with surprise, learning that the system only activated after a person reached 13 and defeated a creature. A plan quickly formed in Derek's mind. He fixed his eyes on the wolf, who instantly sensed danger. Within an instant, Derek eliminated the creature effortlessly. Thomas was horrified, unable to understand why Derek would kill it. Derek calmly gestured that the wolf had not been a pet and would have attacked the moment it was released. A new system notification appeared. Level 53, dire wolf eliminated. System unlocked. Derek felt excitement rising. Things were finally become interesting again. Suddenly, additional notifications appeared. Threat elimination failed. Threat suppression in progress. Understanding dawned. The new system had attempted and failed to erase his old one. A slow, satisfied smile formed on Derek's face. He now possessed two systems. As Derek pondered his situation, Tomas's stomach growled loudly, betraying his hunger. The boy flushed with embarrassment, and Derek glanced over with a puzzled look, silently wondering if the child needed food. Tomas's expression confirmed that he did. Derek prepared the wolf meat over a small fire. While Tomas watched, he handed the boy a container of water. Tomas accepted the gesture gratefully and drank it all in one go, prompting Derek to caution him, through expression and gesture, not to consume it too quickly, lest he upset his stomach. Realizing his mistake, Tomas regained his manners and nodded in agreement. Meanwhile, Derek contemplated how to access his original system. He navigated the menus of the new one and purchased a basic meditation skill, determined to locate traces of his old power. His eyes gleamed with focus as he attempted to unlock the dormant remnants within himself. A notification informed him that a sleeping skill had been detected, and a fusion between the two systems had begun, accompanied by a sharp headache. Derek insisted to himself that everything was fine. Nothing was wrong. Moments later, another message declared that his meditation skill had reached level 20 and evolved into a superior form. His expression hardened as he questioned whether his old abilities still existed. The system revealed they were merely dormant. A grin, borderline insane, spread across Derek's face as he realized he might eventually become even stronger than before. As they continued walking through the forest, Tomas hesitantly gestured toward Derek's strange device, wondering if it was safe to use while traveling. Derek lifted the boy onto his shoulder, signaling that the process was harmless. The warrior reminded Tomas, through tone and posture, of their agreement. Tomas would tell him about the world in exchange for Derek's protection. Tomas agreed and began explaining. He described a world governed entirely by something called the Great System. According to his grandfather, the system was fair and a blessing to all. But Tomas expressed, through anger dampened by fear, that this was not true. The nobles manipulated the system to empower themselves, widening the gap between the elite and everyone else. With bitterness in his eyes, Tomas recalled how these nobles had caused a tragedy, the tragedy that took his parents. Emotion overcame him, and he slipped on the path. Derek reacted swiftly, warning him, through firm gestures, to be more careful. To calm the boy, he handed him a small mirror, signaling that he was not foolish enough to harm him. Seeing that the haircut had turned out decent, Derek praised Tomas's survival instincts. At dawn, Derek awakened Tomas, gently shaking the sleeping boy and urging him to face the new day. As they neared a village, Derek noticed the growing quiet and asked, through expression, what had happened. Spotting a wooden sign, Derek sought directions to Tomas's home. Thomas pointed to the right and indicated that he was from Rena's village. Suddenly, Thomas leapt from Derek's shoulders and sprinted forward, shouting for Mr. Jones. He raced through the village streets, horrified to find bodies scattered along the way. At last, he reached a house with a shattered door. He pushed inside and found Mr. Jones lying lifeless on the floor, clearly attacked without warning. Derek placed a hand on Tomas's trembling shoulder, offering silent comfort. Thomas, eyes brimming with tears, explained that Mr. Jones had not been his grandfather, only a kind man who helped others. He added that the man had reached level 30, which in this region should have made him untouchable. Derek, unimpressed, wondered whether level 30 was considered powerful here. Tomas insisted that at such a level, nothing in the forest should have been able to harm the man. Derek folded his arms, silently asking if the boy was truly confident in that unique claim. Then he revealed that the wolf Derek had slain earlier was level 53. Tomas refused to believe it. He insisted it was impossible uncomfortable and assumed Derek was lying. Fear overtook him, and he urged that they needed to return immediately to warn Chief Reina of the danger. Derek wondered whether Tomas still had a home to return to at all. Far away, a green sphere glowed intensely within a dark grove. A wolf with luminous eyes watched the orb with fascination. Nearby, a wounded wolf twitched and growled, its yellow eyes blazing. Suddenly, a skeletal creature wreathed in green aura materialized and struck the beast with a merciless blow. The creature's skull-like face twisted with grim satisfaction. The lich hovered ominously as spectral skulls orbited around it. In another village under a bright morning sun, a young girl named Brandy struggled to carry a basket that was far too heavy for her. Her mother, Mallory, concerned, wondered if she could truly manage it alone. The girl insisted she could. She had recently unlocked the great system and was proud of herself. Her mother beamed with pride, though it was clear the girl was pushing herself far beyond her limits. As Brandy and her mother walked along the village path, Mallory reminded her daughter, through gentle insistence, to ask her father for leather during his next hunt. Brandy brightened at the thought, eager to improve her leatherworking skill. Mallory even suggested, with a note of pride, that perhaps her father would allow Brandy to assist in skinning the next animal. At that idea, Brandy's excitement evaporated. The word skin resurfaced in her mind with alarming vividness, and she stiffened, remembering something that had happened 2 weeks prior. On that day, her father had taken her to unlock her system using a special gift. A harmless-looking level 10 creature, one that resembled an adorable squirrel-like fox. The gentle little beast had been sniffing a flower in a field, completely unaware of danger. Yet Brandy had been forced to kill it in order to awaken her system. She had regretted it instantly. Mallory attempted to comfort her, insisting Brandy eventually grow used to such necessities, though she privately admitted she regretted choosing that creature for her daughter's initiation. Without warning, Travis, Brandy's father, burst into view, bloodied and exhausted. With pained urgency, he signaled for Mallory to take Brandy to the gate at once. Mallory demanded to know what had happened, but Travis conveyed through strained breath that powerful beasts were attacking the village. Brandy called out to him in confusion and fear, but Travis insisted there was no time to explain. He urged her to trust her mother. Brandy nodded reluctantly. Travis drew his weapon, silently declaring his intent to fight. He motioned for them to flee quickly and locked eyes with them one last time, expressing wordlessly that he loved them and wanted them to survive. Flames began to consume the village behind them. As the two fled, Brandy anxiously wondered if her father would survive. Mallory, wearing a brave smile despite her fear, assured her daughter through tone and demeanor that he would return to them. Elsewhere, Chief Leon led a group of villagers toward Reina's village. He urged the group forward with the promise that, if they moved swiftly, they would reach safety before nightfall. He attempted to steady their nerves, indicating that panic would help no one. But a massive paw emerged from the shadows. Sensing danger instantly, Leon turned to see a colossal wolf advancing. He motioned for everyone to scatter. Within moments, the beast lunged and tore into the defenseless villagers, ripping through their formation with horrifying speed. Nearby, Mallory and Brandy witnessed the carnage with terror-stricken eyes. One of the wolves, half-skinned, wounded, and monstrous, turned its attention to them. Mallory stepped forward, preparing to fight. She urged Brandy to run, but the girl refused to abandon her mother. The wolf leaped toward them, and Mallory forced out a desperate command for her daughter to flee. Brandy froze in fear as the creature's jaws rushed closer. Mallory intercepted the wolf with her spear, but the beast's strength quickly overwhelmed her. She was knocked to the ground as 2 additional wolves emerged. In her mind, Mallory pleaded with herself to hold the wolves back long enough for Brandy to escape. With tears streaming, Brandy fled, her sobs filling the air. She ran blindly until she collided with a towering figure clad in armor. Derek looked down at the trembling girl and seemed to assess the scene, silently asking if they required assistance. Tomas, who had been nearby, anxiously kicked Derek's leg, frustrated and gesturing toward the danger as if Derek could not see it. Brandy, nearly collapsing, begged, through panicked pleas, for someone to save her mother. Brandy clung to him, desperate for her mother not to die. Derek, now understanding the situation, drew a knife with calm precision. A surge of blue energy glimmered along his fingers as he pointed toward the fight. A thin beam of power shot from his fingertip, cutting cleanly through the air. It struck one of the wolves and annihilated it instantly. Mallory stared, stunned by what had just occurred. Turning toward the remaining beasts, Derek indicated that the final 3 wolves would be ideal for experience. Mallory's expression twisted with fury. She cared nothing for gaining strength. She only wanted the monsters dead. Derek's confident smile suggested he found the situation amusing. The 3 wolves lunged at him simultaneously. Derek slipped past the first blow, seized a wolf by its paw, and used its body to vault away from the other 2. With effortless force, he slammed the creature into the ground, creating a thunderous shockwave. Blue light crackled over his skin as he prepared to fight in earnest. In the blink of an eye, he dispatched the remaining wolves. Twisting midair, he delivered a final blow to the last one, ending the battle in seconds. Lightning-like energy rippled around him, revealing the full extent of his power. Surrounded by the fallen beasts, Derek concluded, with irritated disappointment, that the battle had not been enjoyable after all. The wolves were simply too weak. Brandy sprinted to her mother and wrapped her arms around her. Mallory was shaken but relieved to see her daughter unharmed. Brandy wept for her father, but Mallory tried to soothe her. In her thoughts, Mallory acknowledged a chilling truth. She had never encountered anyone as overwhelmingly strong as this strange warrior. She then thanked Derek for saving them and, with lingering fear, asked who he truly was. Derek responded with indifference, implying he was merely escorting Tomas back to his village. Tomas attempted to warn him about the danger awaiting there, but Derek appeared unmoved. He had promised only to return the boy home, nothing more. Whether Tomas's friends lived or died was, in Derek's eyes, outside the bounds of their agreement. He reasoned with cold detachment that the village was likely already gone, consumed by the same creatures that had raised the previous one. A nearby woman, bewildered by Derek's presence, wondered aloud if the Grace Falls had sent him to investigate the forest. Derek dismissed the assumption without hesitation, leaving the woman even more confused. Tomas urgently tugged at Derek's arm, insisting they go and help the remaining villagers before it was too late. He became even more baffled when Derek clarified that if anyone fought, it would be him alone. Derek emphasized that their arrangement was strictly transportation, not heroism. He then asked Tomas a pointed question, whether the boy understood why Derek was still alive in this merciless world. Derek explained, without a hint of remorse, that he trusted no one but himself, and that survival belonged to those who avoided playing the hero. Every time he had intervened for others in the past, catastrophe had followed. He had no intention of repeating the same mistakes. Tomas erupted with anger, insisting that Derek should help simply because he possessed the strength to do so. Derek found the boy's outburst amusing, mentally noting that the child sounded exactly like a 12-year-old idealist who had not yet tasted the world's cruelty. Fueled by frustration, Tomas began striking Derek's armor with everything he had, sobbing through his fury. The surrounding villagers watched with unease as Tomas called Derek a coward for refusing to save people who desperately needed help. Derek surprised them all by agreeing with Tomas, admitting through his actions that he was indeed selfish, living in a world where heroes died and the selfish survived. He caught Tomas's wrist gently to stop the assault, then delivered a lesson that to become a hero, one must first learn how to survive as someone who expects nothing from the world. Tomas stared at him with renewed determination, understanding for the first time the harshness behind Derek's philosophy. Derek knelt to the boy's eye level and acknowledged, through weary honesty, that the lesson had become so deeply ingrained in him he sometimes forgot when it was time to break it. He hoisted Tomas onto his shoulders. Tomas, startled, asked what he was doing. Derek rose with new purpose and stated simply, through his expression and movement, that they were going to save the village. Tomas could only stare, overwhelmed by the abrupt shift in the man he had just cursed moments earlier. Meanwhile, Brandy's father, Travis, confronted a monstrous corrupted bear deep within the burning outskirts. He braced his spear as corrupted energy flared from the creature's eyes. With a roar, the beast charged. Travis met the impact head-on, creating a shockwave that shook the forest floor. He fought as the lone shield between the monster and the remaining villagers, refusing to yield. Derek guided Tomas through the smoldering remnants of Reina's village. He did not shield Tomas from the horror. Instead, he wanted the boy to confront the harsh truth of their world. This was not a rescue. It was a recovery. Abruptly, Derek halted, sensing life beneath a mound of collapsed debris. A faint groan rose from the rubble. He signaled Tomas to stay back, but the boy rushed forward anyway. They uncovered Chief Leon, barely clinging to consciousness. The chief urged Tomas to flee, warning that the wolves were still hunting. His gaze then drifted painfully toward the fallen body nearby, Travis, Brandy's father. The sight crushed what little hope remained in him. He lamented that although Travis had fought with everything he had, his wounds were fatal. He quietly confessed that the village had no survivors left. Desperate, he asked if there was a healer among them, though he knew the request was futile. Derek considered using the rare potion in his possession, yet his heart and nature overpowered his compassion. He refused to act the hero. Instead, he stepped aside, giving Travis and his family their final moments. Mallory collapsed to her knees beside her dying husband, pleading through trembling whispers for him to stay. With his last breath, Travis reached for Brandy and expressed, through fading strength, his love and his desire that she grow strong. Moments later, the light in his eyes extinguished forever. Brandy remained kneeling in the dust, her world shattered. Mallory's anguished cry echoed across the ruined village. Later, as the group of survivors trekked away from the burning remains, Derek announced, through weary pragmatism, that they needed to continue moving. Tomas, emotionally devastated, struggled to process what he had witnessed. Derek offered him a brand of comfort only he could give, cold, blunt, and deeply flawed. He suggested Tomas would eventually grow accustomed to loss. Chief Leon immediately seized Derek's arm, outraged by such callousness. He demanded to know who Derek was and why any child should travel with him. Derek remained silent, unbothered by the chief's ire. Tomas stepped forward to defend him, admitting he understood loss more than anyone realized. He confessed, with quiet pain, that at least Brandy got to say goodbye, something he himself had never received. A memory surfaced of a much younger Tomas waiting for parents who would never return. As they pressed on, Derek finally checked his system notifications. He noted he had reached level 10, unlocking the option to choose a class. but the available choices made him stop in stunned disbelief. Shadow Brawler, a rare class specializing in lethal close quarters combat. Chaos Glaive, an epic class forged in pure destruction. Eternal Guardian, an epic class born from undying flame. Each option radiated immense power far beyond what he expected. Derek found himself paralyzed by the possibilities, his mind racing as he stared at choices that could reshape his entire existence. A sheen of sweat gathered across his brow. He stared, wide-eyed, at a final, previously unseen option illuminating at the bottom of his class selection list. Champion of the Void, an epic class born not from legend or lineage, but from his own personal nightmare. The description stated plainly that he would never again be imprisoned within that realm, for he now carried a portion of it within himself. The words dragged him back to memories he wished he could forget, the boundless emptiness, the constant gnawing hunger of that abyss, and the relentless torment that had nearly driven him mad. The Void had never been a mentor. It had never been a guardian. It had been a merciless tyrant. It had shattered him, consumed him, and remade him into something unrecognizable. But in exchange for his suffering, it now offered him dominion. He realized then that he had not simply escaped the Void. The Void had chosen him. With a pulse of violet power, he accepted. A torrent of chaotic energy erupted from his body. Chief Leon instinctively yanked Tomas backward as a pillar of purple light shot skyward, ripping open the clouds. The survivors could only stare helplessly as Derek disappeared within the storm of void energy. For an instant, it felt as if the world itself recoiled. When the energy finally receded, Derek emerged transformed, armored in void-forged brilliance, every movement radiating power. He marveled at the raw force now coursing through him. The light pillar became a beacon visible for miles, announcing his ascension. Tomas and Leon stared in disbelief, unable to fathom what they had just witnessed. Elsewhere, the remaining survivors staggered as another violent surge of energy crashed back to Earth, flattening what little remained of the village. Derek looked up, sensing that his new class had not come alone. A presence was forming. Something colossal, something alive. From the swirling void energy, a monstrous creature began to materialize. Derek watched its arrival with an unsettling blend of curiosity and amusement. Chief Leon, horrified, demanded to know where Thomas had found such a man. Mallory and Brandy could only stand there, stunned and lost, as the creature finished taking shape. Derek felt oddly delighted. His new class had gifted him a summon. The void beast crashed into the clearing with earth-shaking force. Derek regarded it with interest, noting its size and presence. He decided to name it Asher, and the creature responded with a flicker of recognition, as if the void itself acknowledged the title. It was slightly smaller than the last beast he had encountered, but powerful enough. The others watched in fear and confusion, questioning Derek's sanity. Leon realized, too late, that Derek could control the monster. Derek immediately attempted to teach his new summon obedience, beginning with the simplest command. Predictably, the void beast disagreed. It seized him and slammed him into the ground with explosive force, shaking the ruined landscape. Tomas screamed Derek's name, but Leon held the trembling boy back. Dust rose. Silence followed. Then an armored hand broke through the rubble. Derek stood, battered but alive, and indicated sharply that his brief partnership with his summon was finished. Asher roared in defiance, unwilling to bow to its creator. Though bleeding and exhausted, Derek ordered the others to flee. He conjured a blade of pure void light as he stepped forward, ready to battle his own creation. His system failed to identify the creature, confirming his suspicion. This beast did not originate from their world. It outclassed the previous creature he had fought by an impossible margin. Purple energy flared. Derek launched himself toward the beast, a streak of violet across the sky. Asher met his charge with snapping jaws, its aggression overwhelming. Derek countered with a blast of energy, yet the creature effortlessly stopped it with the flat of its palm. Its strength dwarfed his. A split second later, Asher unleashed a devastating beam of concentrated void energy. The impact hurled him across the battlefield. His mind reeled at how something so massive could move with such speed. The creature readied another strike. Derek barely dodged as the beam carved a massive scar through the landscape. He tasted blood. His armor cracked. His limbs trembled. He was being overpowered by his own summon. For a fleeting moment, he pondered the possibility of playing dead and hoping the beast would grow bored. It was an absurd thought, but tempting. No such luck. Asher began a relentless onslaught, hammering Derek with crushing blows. His health plummeted. A system warning flashed, urging immediate action. He activated his meditation skill, desperately searching for an opening. A burst of adrenaline hit him. He lunged forward, blade glowing with renewed power. Asher caught the weapon between its teeth and shattered it effortlessly. Each hit pushed Derek closer to collapse. From the sidelines, Tomas watched helplessly, tears streaming as his protector was brutalized. Leon urged the survivors to flee. None of them could possibly intervene. Asher gathered power for a final annihilating blast. Derek, unable to move fast enough, knew it would kill him. His regeneration could not keep up with the incoming damage. His health dipped dangerously low. His armor fractured. Pain blurred his vision. The world narrowed to a single burning point of desperation. He made his decision. He threw every remaining point into a new skill, triggering an emergency system merge. The merger tore through him. His scream cut through battlefield, but the pain granted speed, allowing him to narrowly avoid Asher's cataclysmic slam. The system confirmed the merge's success. His weapon mastery surged to its maximum level. The earth cracked beneath him as his power spiked. He was back on his feet. Blue and purple energy wreathed his form as he rocketed into the sky, manifesting a radiant spear of condensed light. His focus sharpened. The pain faded. He clashed with the beast's claws in a violent struggle for dominance. He pushed forward with everything he had, but his blade halted abruptly, unable to pierce the monster's skin. The void itself was neutralizing his strength. He found that insulting, so he made a decision. He infused his weapon with the very essence of the void, fighting void with void. Master and summon collided in a final thunderous exchange. The resulting explosion tore through Asher's defenses. Derek was thrown backward by the sheer force of his own attack, but recovered midair and landed gracefully. The battle was over. Breathing heavily, he admitted to himself, if only quietly, that the fight had been exhilarating. He stood victorious above the fallen form of his void beast. The system rewarded him handsomely, acknowledging that he had successfully tamed his new companion. In a distant region of the kingdom, a soft knock echoed through a richly adorned chamber. An attendant entered with hurried steps and reported grave news to his mistress. A new reading from the Crown's detection network showed an unmistakable spike of void beast energy, something that should not have appeared on this continent. A red-haired woman examined the documents with quiet intrigue. Her cold, analytical expression never wavered as she issued a single decisive command. A hunter was to be dispatched immediately. Meanwhile, deep within the forest, the exhausted remnants of the Reina villagers continued their slow march. A woman turned back and froze, her eyes widening as she spotted Chief Leon and the children emerging from the trees. They were alive, albeit bloodied and overwhelmed by exhaustion. Relief washed through the survivors, but it quickly shifted into apprehension as they pressed Leon for answers. Leon, however, found himself unable to speak. The weight of failure pressed so heavily upon him he could scarcely breathe. A lone tear escaped down his cheek, a wordless confession of everything he had lost. The others stared at him in stunned silence, unable to argue. Leon knelt beside the fallen, his thoughts consumed by guilt. He saw every death as his burden to carry. Before he could break completely, Tomas sprinted past him. The boy's eyes locked onto Derek, and in a burst of relief, Tomas threw his arms around him. Embarrassment soon took over, but his joy could not be hidden. Derek then approached Mallory and Brandy, his expression softening for the first time. He revealed that he had recovered Travis's body so they could give him a proper burial. Mallory stared at him, overwhelmed. Gratitude washed through her, fragile yet sincere. Derek acknowledged her thanks with a silent nod, his stoic demeanor returning. That night, the survivors set up a modest camp beneath a full moon. They were warned to remain close to the fire. The forest was far from safe after dark. Leon kept vigil, his posture tense, the mantle of leadership heavy upon him. As the flames crackled, Tomas finally asked the question that had lingered in every mind since the battle. Derek dismissed the confrontation with the void beast as trivial, implying the creature had simply grown bored and wandered off. Tomas doubted this explanation. Mallory supported the boy, noting the legends surrounding void monsters and how unprecedented Derek's feat had been. Derek merely shrugged, claiming it had been a fluke, and that he did not intend to use that ability again. His tone severely downplayed the terrifying price he had paid. The survivors exchanged uneasy glances. The legends seemed far less exaggerated now. With dawn arrival, Mallory rallied everyone to resume their journey. As they prepared to depart, a small hand tugged on Derek's sleeve. It was Brandy. She shyly asked if she could have some of the animals he carried in his dimensional bracelet. She explained she had overheard his earlier conversation. Derek agreed and retrieved a rabbit from his inventory, handing it to her. He promised she could receive larger animals later. Brandy accepted the creature with gratitude, but soon grew somber. When Derek asked why she wanted them, she held the rabbit close and revealed the truth. She hoped to use her leatherworking skill to craft armor for others. The memory of her father teaching her about the forest flickered behind her eyes. She said nothing of her grief, but Derek understood. He told her she could have all the creatures she needed. Elsewhere, a pompous guard sitting atop a fortified gate drummed his fingers impatiently. He complained to himself about the assignment, annoyed that he had been sent to such a remote settlement without even the comfort of scented baths. The horrors of the common folk were clearly beyond him. When the survivors approached, he refused them entry, claiming they lacked the proper documentation. Mallory's fury surged, and she insisted he fetch someone named Reina. The guard smirked with smug arrogance, delighting in his authority. A villager turned to Leon, begging him to intercede, but Leon's spirit had broken. He doubted whether he deserved to call himself chief anymore. Brandy stepped forward and pleaded with the guard, explaining that their village had been destroyed and they had nowhere else to go. The guard dismissed her without sympathy. He cited the Gracefall decree, stating no one could enter without authorization. Derek then stepped forward, his expression darkening. He demanded to know who exactly would enforce that decree if he decided to ignore it. A dangerous light flickered behind his eyes. Mallory immediately grabbed his arm, recognizing the thin line he was about to cross. The guard, disappointed, lamented that common sense had once again ruined his entertainment. He ordered the gates closed. But before they could shut fully, a voice from within demanded an explanation. Two figures approached. Wallace Gracefall, the white-haired youngest son of Walter Gracefall, and the local chief, Raina. Raina recognized Mallory at once. Concern washed over her as she learned their village had been lost. She offered heartfelt condolences and welcomed the survivors inside. When Wallace attempted to assert his noble authority, Raina forcefully dismissed his objections. She declared that these people were now under her protection. Mallory thanked her sincerely as she led the survivors into their temporary refuge. Raina quietly warned her that dangers in this town often wore armor rather than fur. Wallace was livid that his status had been challenged so openly. He threatened consequences, invoking his powerful family name, but even he flinched when the subject of family was turned back on him. Muttering curses, he retreated. Derek watched the confrontation unfold. His contract with Tomas was officially complete now. He told himself he would remain only long enough to gather information, though even he seemed unsure if he believed that. Raina called out, inviting him to stay within the safety of the village walls. The unexpected kindness caught him off guard, and after a moment's hesitation, he accepted. As he stepped forward, Raina suddenly stiffened. A wave of unseen force washed over her. For a heartbeat, she felt the crushing pressure of a terrifying aura. She silently wondered what kind of strange being she had just welcomed into their village. Inside the village, an elderly couple waited in painful anticipation. Delilah paced back and forth inside their tidy home, nerves shredded by worry. Her husband Richard watched her helplessly, knowing nothing he said could ease her fear. Delilah snapped with frustration, unable to rest while her grandson Thomas remained missing somewhere in the wild forest. At last, the door opened. The tension shattered instantly. Delilah spun around, ready to scold whoever had delayed, until the sight before her stole the breath from her lungs. Behind Raina, Thomas stood alive. He sprinted across the room, joy radiating from him. Delilah rushed to him, tears breaking free as she wrapped him in her arms. Thomas closed his eyes, sinking into her embrace. For a fleeting moment, peace finally returned to the fractured family. Raina allowed herself a soft smile, as if gently asking whether this reunion had been worth the wait. Derek and Thomas exchanged a quiet, knowing look. Their journey together had finally reached its conclusion. As the reunited family shared their relief, Derek lingered silently in the background, observing without interfering. Soon after, the village elders assembled to confront the grim truth. Raina faced Derek and acknowledged that he alone was the reason anyone had survived. She bowed her head, offering their eternal gratitude. Thomas sat beside Delilah and Richard, relaxing into a rare moment of safety. Derek dismissed the gratitude with a wave, signaling that such formality was unnecessary. Raina insisted, through her firm tone, that a chief must acknowledge those who protect her people, but her expression hardened when she explained they could not pay him. The village's resources were depleted, stretched thin by hardship, and further drained by nobles like Wallace Gracefall. Derek smirked, questioning if she truly believed he had come seeking gold. He explained that Thomas had already repaid his debt by helping him earlier. He redirected the conversation toward the true danger, the corrupted forest. Raina leaned forward, demanding to know what he had discovered. Derek revealed a theory drawn from his own world system. What they faced was likely a dungeon break. He described how dungeons were self-contained worlds of treasure, power, and deadly danger. When a dungeon was neglected, or when the system destabilized, it could rupture and spill monsters into reality. Its corruptive energy poisoned the land and twisted everything it touched. This, he said, was the source of the blight that destroyed their home. Raina remained skeptical. Richard added that remote dungeons could remain undiscovered for years. Slowly, the realization dawned on him. It was the only explanation that aligned with the facts. Raina asked Derek where he came from, hoping to gather more clues. Derek avoided the question. Now that they knew the cause, he insisted they focus on the solution. He tried to leave, suggesting that the nobles could handle the problem themselves. But Raina called after him, halting him mid-step. She admitted they had nothing left to offer, yet begged for his help one final time. Derek sighed heavily and rejected her plea. Thomas looked devastated. Yet, Derek suddenly called for Thomas, telling him to follow. He needed to find Brandy to give her the rest of the pelts. The two disappeared together. Richard admitted Derek had been correct about priorities. Raina, however, wished he didn't express them with such cruel bluntness. She then asked Leon for his assessment. Was Derek an ally or a threat? Leon hesitated. He confessed he could not read Derek at all. Raina sensed there was more, and Leon added one final detail. Derek could summon the void itself. Derek and Thomas wandered through the village, searching for Brandy. A distressed cry from a nearby alley pulled them in. They found Brandy struggling with a noblewoman over a large pelt. The noblewoman ripped it away easily and taunted the girl, savoring her cruelty. Bullying children, it seemed, was a favorite pastime of the local elite. Her smugness vanished the moment she collided with Derek. Fear washed over her, terror as his eyes glowed with a familiar, dangerous light. Before anyone could react, Wallace Gracefall stormed into the alley. He slammed his sword into the ground, furious that a commoner had dared touch one of his own. He threatened Reyna, ordering her to stand aside. Reyna refused, unwilling to permit violence in her village. She already sensed Derek was trouble, and Leon's warning had not been exaggerated. Thomas comforted Brandy as she clutched the stolen pelt. Wallace lunged to strike Derek, eager to crush him. Derek caught his wrist effortlessly, stopping the attack without strain. He tossed Wallace aside and signaled for him to leave with the noblewoman. Derek announced to the onlookers that he had planned to depart anyway. Thomas was stunned, unable to comprehend Derek abandoning them so easily. But Derek glanced back and smiled faintly, promising he would return. He handed Thomas the clippers and told him to keep practicing, while warning him never to unlock his system yet. Derek turned to leave. Wallace rose, seething, and ordered his men to attack. But Derek confronted him before he could speak. Surrounded by the noble's defeated guards, he leaned close and made his warning unmistakably clear. If Wallace ever harmed anyone from this village again, he would personally end him. Wallace's men froze, paralyzed by Derek's oppressive aura. The villagers watched in awe and terror as Derek walked away, a halo of purple powers swirling around him. Wallace, humiliated, ordered one of his soldiers to follow Derek from a distance. After leaving the village boundaries behind, Derek slipped into the forest shadows, replaying something Thomas had mentioned earlier, an achievement he needed to unlock. He knew he required a remarkably high-level kill, something well beyond the ordinary. Unbeknownst to him, or so the stalker believed, a hunter trailed him from the upper branches, maintaining careful distance. The man drew his bow, confident, almost gleeful. He prepared to end the commoner before him. He opened his system, noting that to unlock the achievement, he needed prey above level 112. His own status read level 11, though his pool of unspent points remained massive. As the arrow flew toward his head, Derek mused aloud that he had been aware of the hunter for over an hour. He finally distributed his points. The arrow bounced harmlessly off his cheek as the system chimed in, awarding him 2 new achievements, Jack of All and Meat Shield, along with 2 free skills. The hunter stared in mute disbelief. His mind refused to accept what he had witnessed. He assumed his aim had faltered, perhaps thrown off by nerves. He fired again, this time with full confidence. Derek swatted the arrow aside like dust. Only then did he turn around, his posture politely irritated, as though asking whether the hunter minded terribly. He was in the middle of something important. The assassin's confidence shattered. Panic ripped through him as he prepared to escape. He launched himself into the treetops, sprinting through branches, wondering in terror what sort of creature he had attempted to ambush. He landed on a distant tree limb, gasping with relief. Yet Derek was already there, leaning casually against the trunk, still debating skill selections with himself. The hunter's escape devolved into pure desperation. He scrambled across branches while Derek followed without effort, continuing his internal monologue about skill synergies. At the edge of the forest clearing, the hunter prepared a final stand. He unleashed a frantic volley of arrows, shouting the name of the technique like a battle cry. The resulting explosion blasted apart the tree trunk, leaving a plume of smoke. He held his breath, hoping the attack had worked. But Derek appeared on a branch above him, looking profoundly unimpressed. He revealed he had chosen magic resistance, then retaliated with a swift, precise strike. The hunter, Jeffrey, stumbled back through the underbrush, down the forest trail, and toward the village gates. A guard called out in shock upon seeing his mangled state. When Wallace Gracefall seized him, demanding a report, Jeffrey choked out the truth with his final breath. He couldn't even scratch the man. Wallace's arrogance collapsed into seething fury. He ordered his soldiers to pack. When one timidly asked if they were fleeing, Wallace corrected him sharply. You were returning to the capital for reinforcements. While Wallace stewed in his humiliation, Derek tested one of his newly unlocked skills. He wandered casually, identifying rocks, plants, and trees, accumulating minor experience. His idle practice was interrupted when a forest creature hopped into view. A level 54 horned rabbit, deceptively adorable yet undeniably powerful. Derek crouched down, wondering aloud what such a creature was doing in a dangerous area. The rabbit stared at him with absolute indifference. Derek smiled, remarking that he had no intention of harming it, even though he technically needed higher level prey. The rabbit responded by ramming him square in the face. Derek staggered back in surprise as the creature's horn embedded itself into a nearby tree. Infuriated, the rabbit unleashed an energy beam, clearly offended by Derek's lack of respect. Its expression radiated pure, unfiltered rage. Derek smirked, finally accepting the unexpected challenge. The rabbit dug its tiny paws into the dirt, preparing for a full-scale assault. Another energy blast erupted from its horn. Derek danced through the attacks with effortless agility, eventually snatching the rabbit midair. He held the thrashing creature at arm's length, amused by its fierce spirit. The rabbit bit into his hand with all its fury. A system alert informed him he had taken 26 damage. He nearly laughed, but then a chilling realization crept in. Such an attack would have killed someone like Thomas instantly. His expression shifted. He set the rabbit gently on the ground. Without further confrontation, he waved and walked away. The rabbit watched him leave, its rage simmering into a vow of vengeance. Derek continued down the path, contemplating which new skill to select. The system presented 3 restorative options. Life Leech offered self-healing in combat, ideal for someone with his solitary nature. Rejuvenation provided targeted healing, more useful for allies. He weighed the selfish option against the one that served others. In a rare moment of genuine consideration, he chose the supportive skill, not for himself but for the people he had left behind. The moment hit him unexpectedly hard. After enduring an eternity alone in the void, he had finally found people again, only to walk away from them. He clenched his jaw, frustrated by his own reflexive cynicism. He told himself attachments were dangerous, that staying distant was safer, but his eyes betrayed him. His brooding reflection came to an abrupt end when something slammed into his side with surprising force. Derek staggered backward, bewildered by the sudden impact. As he steadied himself, he found the culprit standing defiantly before him. The same horned rabbit from earlier, now radiating pure outrage. The tiny beast unleashed yet another blast of energy, apparently determined to avenge their earlier encounter. Their petty feud, however, drew the attention of a lurking predator. A wolf lunged from the shadows, only to be brutally dispatched in a blur of violence. The rabbit hopped over its kill, blood dripping from its horns, shattering every assumption Derek had ever held about forest wildlife. He concluded the creature was equal parts adorable psychopath and single-minded idiot, an unnerving combination. The rabbit sat before him, a perfect contradiction of cute innocence and murderous intent. With a faint shrug, Derek accepted that the tiny homicidal creature had apparently chosen him as its new companion. Thus began one of the strangest partnerships the corrupted forest would ever host. They made camp beneath the gnarled trees, allowing themselves a brief respite. Peace, however, was fleeting when one travels with a rabbit capable of doubling as artillery. Derek rewarded his new pet with a begrudging scratch on the head. The rabbit tolerated it with visible disdain, as if the gesture were beneath its dignity. As the firelight flickered, the unlikely pair drifted into rest. A strange but surprisingly effective team, but the rabbit's bloodlust remained unchecked. Before dawn, it leaped back into the forest to continue its cycle of unprovoked violence. When morning arrived, Derek stretched and prepared to set off again. He called for his pint-sized companion to keep up. Instead, the rabbit remained rooted to the ground, refusing to move. He turned, puzzled. The tiny creature hadn't budged an inch. He realized this was as far as his furry little menace intended to travel. It stomped its foot with stubborn finality, making its stance unmistakable. Derek offered a casual farewell, acknowledging that the rabbit was probably the toughest creature in the forest anyway. Their bizarre alliance had been destined to end eventually. Yet as he continued alone, the familiar sting of solitude crept back into his chest. A memory of the void flickered before him, reminding him that being alone had once been forced upon him. Now he insisted it was a choice, though even he doubted that claim. Deeper within the rotting forest, a baleful green orb pulsed with corruptive energy. Derek recognized immediately that he had found the source of the forest's decay. Using his Identify skill, he confirmed the truth. A level 100 dungeon, violently overflowing. Inside, he could easily find a creature strong enough to meet his achievement requirement. At the risk of being sealed inside, trapped again, tightened around his throat, the memory of the void was enough to deter him. He decided to turn back, hoping the nobles had departed by now. He deemed the entire expedition a waste of time and prepared to retrace his steps. That was when the ground ruptured. A monstrous ghoul erupted upward, blocking his path. Derek merely smirked, greeting the undead aberration with unsettling calm. He identified the creature. A level 115 acidic ghoul. Perfect. He had been holding back his frustration for far too long. The beast roared, mirroring his aggression. Their battle erupted instantly. The ghoul lunged, a blur of corrosive green and black. Derek met its charge, his spear blazing with power. One clean strike severed the creature's arm, but the appendage regenerated in seconds, dripping acid. A spray of corrosive fluid hissed through the air, melting his cloak and burning through the remnants of his clothes. The ghoul followed with a sweeping blow, forcing Derek to shield himself with what little gear remained. He dodged and moved backward, finally admitting the creature was more formidable than anticipated. But his expression shifted, taking on a cold, focused resolve. He summoned his armor, powering up fully for the first time in this forest. Energy surged around him as he launched into a devastating counterattack. He parried the monster's frenzied strikes, his spear locking against the ghoul's regenerated limb. Teeth clenched, he refused to yield even an inch. Void light ignited in his eyes. He unleashed a roaring beam of purple energy that blasted into the ghoul's chest. The creature retaliated instantly, driving a massive claw downward. The acidic spray melted his summoned armor, stripping him bare once more. He scoffed at the creature's supposed strength. Was this truly the peak of this world's monsters? He summoned the void's power, the prison that had once broken him, allowing its energy to twist through his body. With a maniacal grin, he dared the beast to amuse him further. The ghoul shrieked and lashed its tongue toward him. Their energies collided in a cataclysm of violet light that obliterated everything around them. Trees vaporized, soil split apart. The forest floor buckled under the force. When the explosion faded, Derek stood alone. The system alerts came in waves. Multiple levels gained, a new achievement earned. The battlefield lay in ruins. acid hissing and steaming pools. He dropped heavily onto the ground, surveying the wreckage. His armor was ruined beyond repair, eaten away by acid. He stored it with a resigned sigh, uncertain when he might ever be able to mend it. He peeled off his scorched shirt and retrieved a spare tunic from his dimensional storage. Grimacing at the crude local style, he slipped it on anyway. Function over fashion. 2 weeks had passed in Reina's village since Derek vanished into the forest. During that time, Thomas devoted himself fully to his new craft, his brow furrowed in concentration as he added the final touches to his latest attempt. At last, he leaned back, declaring, at least inwardly, that his masterpiece was complete. He lifted his prized tool, the clippers Derek had entrusted to him, now the symbol of his budding trade. His first customer observed the results in a polished shard of mirror and reacted with unrestrained delight. With that, Thomas officially became the village's new barber. He offered his services next to Brandy, who responded with a deadpan glare sharp enough to curdle milk. Her silent refusal was absolute. Thomas wisely abandoned the topic. Noticing her frustration, he asked if something troubled her. Brandy confessed she had finally depleted the hides Derek had given her. She had practiced every technique she knew. She needed new materials to progress. Thomas sympathized. He hoped Derek would return before the day he himself unlocked his system. Brandy recalled how Thomas's grandfather once tried to help him unlock early, but Thomas insisted he would wait. Derek had made him a promise, and Thomas believed he would keep it. Far from the peaceful village, a cloaked figure stepped into the ruins of Leon's former home. The stranger knelt, placing a hand against the charred earth. Faint traces of void energy pulsed beneath the soil. The hunter confirmed a void beast had indeed passed through, but another, unfamiliar energy signature lingered beside it. Weak but traceable, the trail pointed directly toward Reina's village. The hunt began. Meanwhile, Derek made his way back from the dungeon's boundary, knowing the place would require tremendous power to clear. Just as he turned to leave, he froze. A familiar creature waited in the middle of the path. Its tiny face twisted into the same eternal expression of fury. Derek couldn't help but grin at his violent little shadow. He wondered whether its persistence was meant as affection, or another attempt on his life. The rabbit clarified its intentions immediately with a hostile stomp. Derek chastised it anyway, reminding the beast he had promised Thomas a suitable first kill. If the rabbit misbehaved, it might very well end up as the offering. The creature seemed to understand, if only barely. He set down new rules. The rabbit could accompany him, but it would not be allowed anywhere near the village. From the rabbit's demonic glare, Derek suspected obedience would be temporary at best. He sighed and moved on. Since the creature insisted on following him, he decided it deserved a proper name. During their rest, he cycled through various possibilities, yet none matched the rabbit's unique temperament, one capable of brutalizing monsters 5 times its level. Then inspiration struck. He knelt and christened the tiny beast Sylvie, a name dredged from a life he had nearly forgotten. Sylvie seemed unexpectedly pleased, which only made her more unsettling. A week later, the pair finally neared the village walls. Derek lifted Sylvie in his arms to deliver their parting message. He explained her particular brand of chaos was absolutely forbidden inside. He vowed to return in a few days and instructed her to wait outside the perimeter. He offered a parting treat, which she regarded with murderous suspicion. He allowed himself a rare moment of sentiment, promptly interrupted when Sylvie drove her head into his stomach, felling a nearby tree in the process. He shouted at the tiny menace while holding up a struggling, level 50 cute chipmunk. Thomas's long-awaited first kill. Finally relieved to be free of his furry stalker, Derek waved to the guard atop the wall. The guard demanded identification, but Derek ignored him. With a single effortless leap, he cleared the entire rampart, landing beside the stunned sentry. He steadied the guard, who nearly toppled over, and even complimented the man's haircut. Thomas's reputation was spreading. Another leap brought him down into the village center. He announced his return loudly, and Thomas nearly collided with several villagers in his sprint toward him. Thomas and Brandy bombarded him with updates, excitement radiating from both. They eagerly asked about the high-level creature he had promised. Derek, overwhelmed by the barrage of enthusiasm, offered a weary nod. Thomas shoved past Brandy, declaring, through bright eyes and determined posture, that he wanted to grow strong enough to stand beside Derek one day. They both stared up at him, breath held, awaiting his answer. Derek relented. He offered Brandy a new knife and assured her he had more hides waiting for her. He gave her a new challenge, reach level 10, and he would provide her a special project. Then he turned to Thomas and asked if he was ready. A faint squeak from his bag revealed the living gift he had brought back. Tomorrow, Derek would help Thomas unlock his system at last. The children erupted with joyous celebration. Their excitement filled the air. But Derek held up a single finger. One final requirement remained. He needed to know if the village had a tavern. Derek pushed open the tavern door with the weary anticipation of a man finally ready to reward himself. A warm wave of noise and the unmistakable scent of ale drifted out to greet him. He paused, taking a long breath, savoring the familiarity of a place meant for rest, a luxury he had not tasted in ages. He stepped inside, already wondering whether this world had anything approximating decent beer. A faint smile tugged at his lips, right up until he collided with a cloaked stranger standing just inside the entryway. The moment his hand brushed the figure's arm, Derek felt a familiar surge of hostile, coiled energy. The stranger froze. Hidden eyes glinted beneath the hood, a targeting mark flickering across Derek as the hunter confirmed the identity of his quarry. Derek sensed instantly that this was no common noble. The hunter examined him with clinical precision, stating flatly that Derek's energy signature matched the anomaly he had been pursuing. Yet he concluded Derek was not the void beast he sought. Derek confirmed as much. Though irritation clouded his features, he knew exactly where this was heading. The hunter pressed further, demanding an explanation for the void scent clinging to Derek's aura. Derek feigned ignorance, hoping to avoid a public spectacle. The interrogation intensified, brief, sharp questions stacked atop one another. Yet Derek parried each inquiry with maddening neutrality. Finally, the hunter accused him outright of deception and reached forward, intending to force an answer. Derek caught his wrist without effort. The air thickened between them as they stood locked in a silent contest of will. Deciding on a new approach, the hunter invoked his identify skill, flooding Derek with a stream of analytical energy. But the system returned only an error. No data, no classification. Both men blinked in disbelief. Awkward. Derek broke the stalemate with a single flat remark and moved to the bar, undisturbed. The bartender greeted him cheerfully by name, confirming his growing reputation. The hunter lingered only long enough to confirm his suspicion. Derek had likely defeated the void beast. Then, silently, he slipped through the tavern door and vanished into the night. Derek allowed himself a breath of relief, right up until he discovered he had no money to pay for his drink. He offered a high-level pelt in exchange, and the bartender's eyes lit up like lanterns. Before he could enjoy the moment, another figure entered the tavern. Derek turned, bracing himself for more trouble. But it was Mallory. She explained she carried a message from Brandy, an invitation to join them for dinner in gratitude for his return. The two strolled through the village with drinks in hand. Mallory asked about the cloaked man, but Derek shrugged the encounter away. She warned him that the stranger belonged to an organization known simply as the Crown. Derek initially mistook it like the Kingdom, but she clarified. The Crown was an independent power, wealthy, influential, and terrifyingly capable in the Kingdom of Sideria. Only the richest elites ever dined in their halls, and their most prized delicacy was the flesh of a void beast. Derek nearly choked on his drink. Consuming one granted immediate power, a shortcut to the ranks of the elite. He assumed there must be lesser void beasts to choose from, but Mallory corrected him. They were exceedingly rare, birthed from the feared abyss itself. The flicker in Derek's expression betrayed the truth. He understood their danger intimately. He masked his reaction quickly, and the two continued onward. They reached the home, where warm lamplight spilled through the windows and the aroma of cooking filled the air. Derek joined the family around the table, tasting a proper home-cooked meal for the first time in what felt like centuries. He judged it the best thing he had eaten in years. Though after subsisting on void monster jerky, the bar was hardly high. Mallory dismissed the compliment, claiming her cooking skill was unimpressive. Richard nearly voiced agreement before catching a glare sharp enough to silence him. Thomas eagerly asked if he would still unlock his system the following day. Derek confirmed it, so long as the boys' grandparents approved. They granted their blessing without hesitation, and Thomas erupted in pure jubilance. Derek lifted a hand, adding a final stipulation. All he wanted after his journey was a warm bath. Thomas bolted from the table like a fired arrow to prepare it. The adults exchanged soft laughter at the boys' relentless enthusiasm. Derek's gaze wandered to the window, briefly catching his own reflection, a distorted echo of the man who once belonged to the void. The moment lingered until a shy poke at his arm drew him back. Brandy stood beside him, offering a small leather charm. She explained she had crafted it as a token of gratitude. Working on it had helped her cope with her father's death. Derek accepted the gift, a genuine smile forming. The room glowed with the warmth of family, shared food, and quiet conversation. For the first time in an eternity, he did not feel like a wandering ghost. For the first time, he felt as though he had truly escaped the void. The next morning, Derek vaulted effortlessly over the village wall with Thomas tucked under one arm. The boy clung to him as if his life depended on it, his face swinging between terror and exhilaration. Derek touched down with flawless precision and announced that this was the perfect place for a life-altering moment. He set the dizzy boy gently on his feet, his expression turning uncharacteristically serious. Thomas's eyes sparkled. This was the day he had been waiting for. Derek produced a finely forged dagger, its metal gleaming in the early light, and placed it in the boy's trembling hands. He rummaged through his bag, pulling out the creature he had captured for this very purpose. With a sly grin, he issued a simple command. Kill it. Thomas tightened his grip on the blade, his resolve snapping into place. A brilliant column of light shot skyward as the system recognized its newest user. Derek retrieved the dagger, completely unfazed, and casually asked how it felt to level up. Thomas, still stunned, could barely process that he had just slain a level 50+ monster. Derek explained the truth. The dagger itself was a masterpiece crafted to make the impossible possible. But before taking another step forward, he posed a far more important question. He knew Thomas wanted to leave the village, wanted strength the forest could never provide. He admitted that he himself was tired of wandering alone. Then, with disarming casualness, he asked, would Thomas like to travel with him? The boy froze, staring at him as if afraid the offer might disappear. His imagination burst open. Adventure, power, exploration, everything he dreamed of. He attempted to act calm, but his barely contained excitement betrayed him. Derek smirked and laid out his conditions. First, Thomas must guard his secrets with his life. Thomas agreed with dramatic seriousness. Second, he must learn to stand on his own 2 feet. Not even Derek would always save him. Third, and most crucial, absolute, unquestioning obedience. Thomas hesitated at that final promise. It was heavy, far heavier than the dagger in his hand. Derek reassured him. He wasn't evil, but he wasn't exactly a saint either. Thomas inhaled deeply, then accepted. His future was set. They sealed the pact with a firm handshake. Their first training session began immediately. Derek explained that Thomas would be losing most of his starting points, crushing the boy's hopes of creativity. Reluctantly, Thomas selected his first 2 defensive skills. Derek then offered him one last point, something flashier. Thomas wanted to be stealthy. Derek knew exactly what skill to give him. With a single tap, the new ability was locked in. Before Thomas could enjoy his new powers, Derek ordered him to put every stat point into defense. The boy's dream of getting a piggyback ride was destroyed seconds later when Derek sprinted off at full speed, leaving him behind in a cloud of dust. Their training had officially begun. Back at the house, Thomas collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. While he recovered, the village council gathered to discuss their dire predicament. Raina warned that choosing the wrong team would be suicide. Derek listened in silence, his jaw tightening. Raina unveiled her plan, but he immediately questioned whether it was enough. Then he revealed the truth. The dungeon he found was level 100. The room fell into stunned disbelief. Leon murmured that sending silver rank adventurers would be sentencing them to death. They would need gold rank heroes at minimum. Derek requested a map. Thomas, determined to be helpful, bolted off to fetch it. Raina spread the parchment across the table, marking the known dungeon sites. A close-up illustration revealed a weaker level 25 dungeon nearby. Derek pointed to the heart of the corrupted forest. He asked permission to update the map and marked the new threat. Then he asked if he could make a copy. As he handed Raina her updated chart, he surprised her with a pointed question. He asked why her level was so low. Raina explained her rare class left her little time for actual combat. Her duty as chief bound her to the village, and their outdated weapons couldn't handle stronger monsters anyway. A chipped, worn blade confirmed her words. Derek tossed her a superior sword without warning, nearly startling her out of her chair. He invited her to train with him and Thomas. Randy's eyes widened in surprise, and even Thomas gaped at the unexpected offer. If Raina agreed, the weapon was hers. She inspected the blade. Its craftsmanship leagues beyond anything the village possessed. With renewed resolve, she accepted. Derek announced he was off to visit his newest best friend, the bartender. Elsewhere, Wallace Gracefall standing before his father, Walter, begging for reinforcements. Walter was unimpressed. He reminded Wallace that the villagers had requested a silver-ranked adventurer team, a problem Wallace himself failed to handle. He refused to be humiliated a second time. Wallace would deal with the mess alone. Wallace tried to argue, but Walter silenced him with a single word of dismissal. Defeated and humiliated, Wallace turned away, declaring that if his father wanted him to handle them, then he would do it in his own way. The next morning, still uncertain about the request, Raina quietly asked him again if he was sure about this. Derek confirmed without hesitation. She could attack him with everything she had. Raina hesitated, reminding him that he wasn't even wearing armor. Derek simply repeated that she should attack. Resigned, Raina raised her sword. A sharp wind gathered around the blade, circling with growing intensity. She thought to herself that she would at least hold back a portion of her strength, even if he insisted otherwise. But even while holding back, she infused the strike with the full force of her wind aura. The blue wind flash shot forward. Derek didn't move. He didn't even brace. Near them, Thomas fell to his knees in panic. He wondered desperately if asking Derek to train him had been a huge mistake. Derek stood still as the attack struck him directly in the chest. Raina's eyes widened in disbelief. He took it head-on without flinching. Thomas, on the other hand, stared in awe, overwhelmed by how incredible Derek was. Derek calmly told Raina not to hold back next time. With no choice, Raina vowed to unleash her full power. She gathered everything, all of her wind, all of her strength, and released another devastating strike. The result was exactly the same. Raina staggered as the last of her mana drained away. Derek stepped forward and gently patted her head, reminding her that she was completely out of mana and needed to meditate until she fully recovered. Now it was Thomas's turn. Thomas froze the moment Derek looked at him. Derek instructed him to pick any weapon he wanted and then try to kill him. Thomas was horrified just hearing the word kill, but Derek, growing irritated, told him to stop whining. If Thomas genuinely believed that a tiny puppy like him could kill someone like Derek, then he was free to try. Sweating nervously, Thomas picked up a dagger. He gathered every ounce of his strength and charged forward. The attack missed entirely. The dagger didn't even graze Derek. Instead, Thomas stumbled past him and fell forward, shocked at his own failure. Derek stared in disbelief. Thomas apologized, but Derek cut him off, telling him not to be sorry, just to do better. Thomas tried again, and again he missed in exactly the same way. Frustration finally showed on Derek's face. He told Thomas to switch weapons. A spear would at least force him to adjust his stance, but Thomas stubbornly insisted on using the dagger again. Derek reminded him of their agreement and ordered him to choose the spear. The following days passed under strict training. Reina's attacks grew fiercer, raising both her windblade and magic resistance skills. Derek's own resistance increased steadily as he withstood every strike without moving an inch. Thomas continued to struggle with daggers, but whenever he held a sword or spear, his movements were sharp and surprisingly promising. Between training sessions, Derek entered the forest to hunt beasts, dragging them back so Thomas could land the finishing blow to gain experience. At night, they returned to the village for dinner. During one dinner, Thomas's grandfather quietly reminded Derek to treat the boy gently, noting that Thomas was stubborn because Thomas wanted to become like his father, who had also been a dagger user. Thomas finally reached level 10. Derek told Thomas that it was time to choose a class, adding that Thomas should select the class that was best for survival, not the one he simply found impressive. Derek also added that Thomas could ask for his advice if needed. Thomas agreed and opened his system. A bright green aura erupted around him as the class screen activated. Derek asked what Thomas had done, noting internally that Thomas hadn't spoken a command aloud. Thomas explained proudly that a perfect option had appeared. Thomas revealed that the class he received was Rogue, the same class his late father once held, and that it was ranked as uncommon. Thomas celebrated excitedly, thrilled to match his father. Derek's expression darkened as he asked whether no better options had been available. He further asked whether Thomas had ignored stronger choices merely because of emotional attachment. Thomas admitted that rare classes had appeared, but he had remembered how admirable his father once seemed and allowed that memory to influence his decision. Derek reprimanded Thomas, stating that Thomas's father had only been a rare tier rogue and that Thomas himself was terrible with daggers. Derek stated that if Thomas continued thinking like a child, Derek might reconsider bringing him along. Derek added that he had treated Thomas like an adult, yet Thomas was not acting like one. Thomas's eyes teared up as he apologized, saying he wished to follow Derek and grow stronger. Derek asked how he was meant to trust Thomas if Thomas would not follow orders or keep secrets. Thomas insisted that he would obey completely and would keep every secret faithfully. In desperation, Thomas proclaimed an oath upon the great system itself. Immediately, a system window manifested. A system oath has been established. If Thomas breaks the oath, all classes and skills granted by the grid system will be removed. Derek asked why Thomas had taken such a reckless step, and whether Thomas was truly this desperate. Thomas replied that he wished to follow Derek no matter what. Derek sighed and declared that Thomas would receive one chance, only a single one. Derek stated that they would leave the next morning and that Thomas would be tested inside a dungeon to prove whether his oath had been sincere. Outside Capitol Gate, a lone horse cart rolled steadily along the road. Inside it sat Wallace and his group of noble companions, each of them looking increasingly displeased the closer they drew to their destination. One noble girl complained that she wondered whether they truly had to return to that piggy-stay village. Another noble muttered that he could already smell the stench from yesterday and questioned aloud what they were supposed to endure this time. A third blonde noble expressed annoyance, stating that the villagers should have treated them with far more respect, perhaps even holding a welcome banquet in honor of noble guests such as themselves. Their grumbling filled the small cart until Wallace finally snapped at them, ordering them to remain silent. He pushed aside the curtain and looked out the window, his gaze fixed on the distant path ahead. He told them that if they simply endured for a few more days, the entire ordeal would finally come to an end. The next morning, Derek and Thomas headed toward a nearby dungeon gate, where a glowing green orb hovered quietly in the air. Derek studied it with a thoughtful expression, thinking to himself that before they attempted higher-level challenges, they needed to clear at least 2 level 25 dungeons. Those would provide Thomas with enough experience to prepare him properly before moving on to Stogan 1. Thomas, staring nervously at the floating orb, asked why they had come to this place. Derek answered with a calm smile, telling him that they were here to clear a dungeon. Thomas protested that it was a level 25 dungeon, insisting that it was impossible for them to enter. But Derek leaned in slightly and told him that this was one of the secrets Thomas would have to keep, and that he wanted to show him something. Then, Derek raised both hands above the green orb. A dungeon window materialized in front of them, displaying Derek's and Thomas's current levels, the dungeon's level requirement, and its type. Thomas gasped loudly when he realized Derek was only level 18. There was no way they should qualify. But then he understood. A bright grin spread across Thomas's face as he realized that if they could enter low-level dungeons this easily, then Derek's strength would carry them safely through them all. But Derek's faint smirk made Thomas freeze. Derek explained that he would not be fighting today, he would only be watching. Thomas would be the one doing the battling. Thomas blurted out in shock, asking what Derek meant by that. Derek simply repeated that nothing trained a person better than real combat. Before Thomas could argue further, the green orb pulsed sharply and released a wave of energy. A system notification announced that participants were registered and ready to enter. The countdown began. A flash of green light swallowed them both. When the light faded, they found themselves standing inside a dense jungle at the mouth of a dark cave. Derek immediately told Thomas to prepare himself. Thomas asked hesitantly if Derek was truly sure about this plan. Derek replied by asking what Thomas was afraid of. He reminded the boy that he had already given him high-grade daggers and brand new armor crafted by Brandy Gear, strong enough to withstand almost any monster in this dungeon. He added that if Thomas simply listened to instructions, he should have enough versatility to survive even if he took a few hits. And if Thomas got into real danger, Derek would intervene. He would receive some experience points as well, making it a win-win situation. Thomas, still uncertain but trusting him, finally nodded. Derek told him with casual confidence that he was about to have a lot of fun inside this dungeon. After some time inside the dungeon, Thomas had already suffered through several close calls. No matter what he fought, he seemed to struggle. A spider chased him endlessly. A giant centipede wrapped itself around him, and when a massive ant was moments away from crunching down on him, he screamed for help. Before the ant could strike, Derek suddenly sliced the creature cleanly in half, its severed head thudding onto the ground. Thomas, exhausted and traumatized, demanded to know what part of this was supposed to be fun. Derek, wearing that same infuriatingly calm smile, told him to relax after all. Thomas hadn't even died yet. Thomas stared at him in disbelief, wondering aloud if something was wrong with Derek. Derek then grabbed Thomas's injured arm. The boy panicked, thinking it was broken, but Derek simply healed it with magic, restoring it as if nothing had happened. With a cheerful tone, he reminded Thomas that they still had to clear the dungeon. It wasn't going to finish itself. As Thomas stared at him in horror, he could only think that something was definitely wrong with this man. A little later, Thomas crouched nervously inside a bush, gripping his dagger with trembling hands. A large beetle monster stood ahead of him. He told himself this was his chance and lunged forward, but the beetle anticipated his attack and hopped backwards, causing him to fall flat on his face. Watching from behind, Derek looked genuinely puzzled at how the boy managed to fail so spectacularly. The beetle then counterattacked, slamming Thomas to the ground with brutal force. When it was about to crush him completely, Derek reminded him sharply to dodge. Thomas scrambled aside just in time. The beetle roared and charged again, smashing Thomas against a tree. Thankfully, Brandy's armor absorbed the impact, saving the boy's life. With renewed determination, Thomas raised his dagger, severed one of the beetle's mandibles, and then leapt high into the air. He plunged the dagger straight into the creature's head. The beetle collapsed. Thomas collapsed too, gasping, sweating, barely conscious. Derek walked over and praised him, saying it was time to evaluate his performance. He asked Thomas what he thought he had done wrong. Thomas admitted that he had put too much force into his swings, throwing himself off balance whenever he missed. Derek shook his head, telling him that wasn't the real issue. According to Derek, Thomas had been wrong from the very beginning of the fight. He hadn't used his rogue skill. He asked Thomas why he didn't use stealth, the very skill he had unlocked just yesterday. Thomas blinked in surprise, realizing he had completely forgotten it existed. When he confessed this, Derek stared at him, astonished. He asked how Thomas could possibly forget the skill he insisted on choosing against Derek's advice. In that moment, Derek couldn't help but acknowledge the painful truth forming in his mind. This kid might genuinely be dumb as hell. At the village entrance, several carriages came to a halt before the gate. The gate guard stepped forward, raising his voice as he demanded their identities. Before anyone could respond, a violent blast erupted. The guard was sent flying backward, crashing hard into the ground. In the next instant, Wallace kicked the village gate open with brute force. The villagers froze in shock, unable to comprehend what was happening. For a brief moment, they feared an attack, until they recognized the group. They were the same adventurers who had visited before. Wallace strode into the village with his party, his expression filled with arrogance. He loudly declared that the villagers' fear of the dungeon would end today. A smug smile spread across his face as he announced that they had come to save the village. Before the villagers could react, Raina stepped forward, her sword almost drawn. She coldly declared that if this was the kind of help they offered, then the village wanted none of it. Then she raised her blade toward the sky, and a blue wind aura surged around it. With authority in her voice, she ordered Wallace and his party to leave immediately. Wallace merely smirked. It was clear. His intentions were far from pure. Deep inside the dungeon, we see a massive level 18 spider ant monster. It had been 4 days since Thomas and Derek entered the dungeon. During that time, Thomas had grown rapidly. He was now level 17. At this point, creatures like giant spiders no longer terrified him. Thomas lunged forward and drove his dagger straight into the spider's chest, killing it. A faint smile appeared on his face. But Derek's voice rang out sharply, warning him to stay alert. Thomas turned just in time to see another large spider charging toward him. When he tried to pull back his dagger, he realized it was lodged deep inside the corpse of the previous monster. The second spider raised its prick, ready to strike. Before it could reach him, a powerful attack pierced straight through its head, dropping it instantly. Thomas fell back onto the ground, breathing heavily. For a moment, he reflected on the fight. He realized that if he had a longer weapon, or something with better leverage, he could have avoided that dangerous situation altogether. Doubt crept into his thoughts. He wondered if he truly wasn't suited for daggers. If choosing this class had been a mistake. Deep down, he admitted that Derek might have been right. Sensing his gloom, Derek spoke calmly, reminding him that he had almost handled the situation perfectly. Compared to when they had first started, Thomas had become an entirely different fighter. Derek pointed out that as long as Thomas could lay out the killing blow, he was doing well. Then he gestured forward. Ahead of them stood a massive gate, blazing with blue energy. Derek told him calmly that only one challenge remained, the dungeon boss. Standing before the dungeon gate, he calmly reminded Thomas of the plan they had discussed earlier. He emphasized that Thomas should rely on his stealth skill, sneak up on the enemy, and aim directly for the head. Most importantly, he warned him not to miss. With that, Derek opened the dungeon gate. A violent gust of wind burst outward, and in the same instant, a surge of blue energy rushed straight toward them. Derek stepped forward and blocked the attack with his bare hands. From within the dungeon emerged a giant ant-type monster, its entire body and blazing eyes radiating blue energy. Seeing it, Thomas hesitated. He admitted that he wasn't sure if he could kill something like that. Derek smiled faintly and adjusted the plan. He stated that there was no need to take unnecessary risks. This time, he would restrain the monster, and Thomas would simply deliver the finishing blow. Before Thomas could respond, Derek charged forward at full speed. Blue energy wrapped around his body as he seized the ant monster by the neck. With a confident grin, Derek made it clear who held the advantage. Using overwhelming strength, he slammed the monster into the ground. The creature let out a broken, crackling sound before going completely still. As the ant lay unconscious, Derek reminded Thomas that the rest was up to him. Thomas nodded, tightened his grip on his dagger, and rushed forward. Without hesitation, he drove the blade straight into the monster's head. Energy immediately surged out from the corpse. A system announcement echoed through the dungeon, declaring that the final boss had been defeated. Thomas smiled in satisfaction. The dungeon had finally been cleared. Still, he let out a quiet sigh, thinking that he could finally leave this exhausting place. Derek congratulated Thomas, but also warned him that from this point onward, everything would only become more difficult. Derek mentioned that he had originally planned to take Thomas into another dungeon, but Thomas had progressed more slowly than expected. Moreover, Thomas's grandmother was likely worried by now. As Derek spoke, he noticed Thomas standing motionless. Thomas was gripping his dagger, still embedded deep inside the ant monster's corpse. Derek looked at him in confusion, unable to understand why he seemed so distressed. Then Thomas shouted that his dagger was stuck again. At that moment, the dungeon system announced the completion rewards. They had obtained Cure Toxin, an item capable of removing toxin infections and contamination from the user or others. Activating it would cost 1 skill point, and by clearing the dungeon, they had earned 2 skill points. Derek told Thomas that they were ready to head back. Thomas agreed. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Derek remarked that Thomas had finally understood why he himself never used daggers. Thomas admitted that he finally got it. He stated that once he reached level 25, he planned to change his class. Derek smiled approvingly and said that was a good decision. He added that Thomas would eventually wield a great spear, his own former weapon, which Derek no longer used. Then, Derek suddenly paused. He mentioned something troubling. There were no guards stationed at the village gate. The realization hit Derek all at once. Without another word, he turned and sprinted toward the village at full speed. As Derek stormed through the village gate, he called out loudly for Raina and Mallory. He stopped abruptly. Lying unconscious on the ground was Brandy. Beside her was her mother Mallory, barely conscious herself and clearly in critical condition. Moments later, Thomas rushed in, panic written across his face as he asked about Brandy's condition. As Derek knelt and placed his hands over both women, he informed Thomas that he had stabilized them and repaired the internal damage. They would survive. Standing up, Derek placed a firm hand on Thomas's head, ordering him to stay there and not move. Thomas asked where he was going, but the answer was already clear. A dense purple aura began to gather around Derek, heavy with killing intent. He was heading toward the center of the village. At the village square, Raina was on her knees, wounded and exhausted. One of Wallace's soldiers stood over her, his sword poised dangerously close to her neck. Wallace spoke coldly, warning her that if she did not reveal Derek's whereabouts, everything that followed would be her responsibility. Stepping forward, he announced his noble lineage with pride. Then, without hesitation, Wallace gracefully pronounced her sentence: death by beheading. His soldiers raised their swords. Suddenly, the air itself trembled. A wave of purple energy flooded the square. The soldiers froze in place. Raina felt it instantly and understood what was coming. In the next moment, Derek appeared, standing before them. His expression was cold, his eyes burning as terrifying purple energy surged around his body. His voice echoed across the square as he spoke calmly. He reminded Wallace that he had already warned him. If Wallace so much as touched anyone in this village, he would kill him. Derek stepped forward toward Wallace, an oppressive wave of purple energy swirling tightly around his body. The air itself seemed to grow heavier with each step he took, as if the space could barely withstand his presence. Wallace's confidence shattered instantly. Panic overtook him, and he stumbled backwards, screaming hysterically at his men to kill Derek at once. Anything to stop him. One of Wallace's subordinates reacted without hesitation. He lunged forward, dagger raised high, aiming straight for Derek's vital points in a desperate attempt to end the threat. Derek didn't even bother to look at him. Without turning his head, he threw a single, casual punch to the side. A sharp cracking sound rang out, chilling everyone who heard it. The man was launched through the air like a rag doll, his body slamming violently into the ground with a sickening thud. Silence followed for a brief moment. Then the fallen soldier's sister froze in place, her mind struggling to accept what she had just witnessed. Tears streamed uncontrollably down her face as grief twisted into rage. Power surged from her body as she began gathering both wind and fire energy at the same time. Her aura flared chaotically, whipping the air around her as she screamed that Derek would pay for what he had done. Flames spiraled violently, compressing into a blazing sphere between her trembling hands. Her voice cracked as she screamed that she would burn him alive. With a raw, desperate cry, she hurled the fireball forward, pouring every ounce of her strength and hatred into the attack. The villagers gasped in horror as the firestorm slammed directly into Derek. A violent explosion erupted, sending shockwaves through the area and bathing the surroundings in scorching heat. Smoke and flames surged upward, obscuring everything from view. Through her sobs, the woman screamed that this was for her sister, her voice breaking as the inferno raged. For a brief moment, Derek was completely swallowed by the flames. One of Wallace's men stared in disbelief, his voice trembling as he asked whether she had actually killed him. Then, two glowing purple eyes opened within the fire. A hush fell over the battlefield. Derek stepped forward from the blazing inferno, flames peeling away from his body as if repelled by an invisible force. He was completely unharmed. Not a single strand of hair was scorched, and his expression remained calm, almost bored. Wallace snapped, his face twisted with terror as he screamed at his subordinates, demanding to know what they were waiting for. He ordered them to kill Derek immediately, his voice cracking with hysteria. At that moment, an arrow was loosed with full force from above, cutting through the air in a sharp whistle as it aimed straight up for Derek's head, an attempt to finish him while he was distracted. Derek reached out without breaking his stride and caught the arrow midair between his fingers. The archer's face went completely pale. His hands began to shake as memories of past slaughter flooded his mind. Whispering in terror that this was happening again, he turned and ran, screaming that he would not die for Wallace. He didn't make it more than a step. The arrow suddenly shot back through the air like a streak of death, piercing straight through his skull. His body jerked once before collapsing lifelessly from the rooftop, crashing onto the ground below. From within the trembling crowd, Thomas's grandfather, Richard, suddenly pushed his way forward. His aged face was pale with fear, and his steps were unsteady as panic drove him onward. He shouted Derek's name again and again, his voice cracking as he begged him to stop. With shaking hands, Richard warned him that these attackers were nobles, people whose deaths carried consequences far beyond the battlefield. Once noble blood was spilled, he said there would be no turning back. The entire village would be dragged into disaster. Derek did not even glance in his direction. A faint purple glow flickered in Derek's eyes as he continued walking forward. His voice was calm, almost emotionless, as he stated that they had already been given a chance. That chance, however, had long since expired. Before Richard could say another word, another man charged at Derek with a sword raised high, screaming as he swung with all his strength. The blade never reached its target. Derek reached out and caught the sword with his bare hand, stopping it completely. The attacker froze, staring in disbelief. His lips trembled as he whispered that such a thing was impossible. There was a sharp metallic crack. Derek closed his hand, crushing the blade as if it were made of brittle glass. Fragments clattered to the ground. In the next instant, the man collapsed, lifeless, his body hitting the dirt without another sound. Derek did not pause. He simply continued walking forward. Wallace snapped. Grinding his teeth, he screamed at his remaining subordinates, calling them worthless and useless. A violent surge of blue energy erupted around his body, blowing debris into the air as he rose off the ground. Stones and shattered wood floated around him, pulled into the storm of power he was unleashing. His face twisted with arrogance and fury as he roared that he would show Derek what it truly meant to be born with superior power. The gathered energy surged outward in a devastating wave, racing toward Derek with enough force to tear everything apart. Derek remained unmoved. In a low, almost whispered voice, he uttered a single word: void. Instantly, a torrent of purple energy exploded outward from his body. Wallace's attack was swallowed whole, erased as if it had never existed. The violent pressure vanished into nothingness, leaving only silence behind. Before Wallace could even react, his body was yanked forward. In the next moment, he found himself suspended in the air, Derek's hand locked tightly around his throat. Wallace clawed at Derek's arm, gasping desperately for air. Panic overtook him as he swore frantically that he would leave, that he would disappear forever, that Derek would never see him again if he were spared. Derek stared at him coldly and replied that he was right. He would never see him again. Derek's fingers tightened. Wallace's eyes bulged and rolled back as blood vessels burst, his struggles growing weaker by the second. Suddenly, a shrill scream cut through the tension. The noblewoman who had attacked earlier lunged forward, grabbing Richard from behind. Flames ignited at her fingertip as she pressed it dangerously close to the old man's chest. She screamed that if Derek did not release Wallace immediately, Richard would die where he stood. Richard trembled violently, terror overwhelming him. He cried out to Derek, begging him to listen. He warned that killing nobles would invite brutal punishment, not only for Derek, but for the entire village. The noblewoman screamed again, ordering Derek to drop Wallace at once. Before anyone could react, a sword burst through her chest from behind. Blood sprayed freely as her body stiffened. Standing behind her was Leon, the former village chief. His expression was grim, his grip firm on the bloodied blade. In a steady, resolute voice, he declared that if nobles wished to threaten his people, then they were free to try. Protecting the village, he said, came before everything else. All eyes turned back to Derek. Wallace still dangled helplessly in his grip, barely conscious. Derek looked down at him and spoke calmly, asking whether, if he were released, Wallace would swear never to retaliate against the village. Terror consumed Wallace completely. He nodded frantically, swearing again and again that he would keep his word, begging for his life with broken, desperate pleas. Derek smiled. Then, without warning, there was a sharp snap. Wallace's neck twisted at an impossible angle. His body went limp as it fell to the ground with a sickening thud. Richard collapsed to his knees, screaming in despair that Derek had doomed them all. Derek glanced down at Wallace's corpse, shrugged lightly, and remarked that his hand must have slipped. The villagers stared at him in absolute terror, the weight of what they had just witnessed pressing heavily on their hearts. Reina lay wounded and unconscious on the cold ground, her breathing shallow but steady. Derek stepped forward without hesitation, gently taking her hand before lifting her into his arms. He carried her toward her home in silence. Around them, the villagers whispered anxiously. Uneasy murmurs spread through the crowd like ripples in water. No one dared to step forward. No one dared to speak loudly. At the edge of the square, Leon sat beside Richard, who looked utterly shaken. Richard muttered in despair that Derek had truly doomed the village this time. Leon, however, placed a steady hand on the old man's shoulder, offering quiet comfort, even though his own expression was heavy. As Derek entered the village chief's house, dozens of eyes followed his back. Fear, awe, and confusion mixed together in their gazes. Leon suddenly raised his voice, breaking the paralysis. He shouted that everyone should stop standing around and start moving. There was cleaning to do. The village still stood, and that meant there was work that needed to be done. Slowly, hesitantly, the villagers obeyed. Before long, people were clearing debris, tending to the wounded, and restoring what they could. Inside Reina's home, the atmosphere was calm but tense. Reina lay on the sofa, wrapped in clean cloth. Her complexion looked better than before, though she remained unconscious. Derek sat nearby on a chair, arms resting loosely at his sides, watching over her. Suddenly, the bracelet on Derek's wrist began to glow. A familiar translucent screen appeared before his eyes. The system interface. Derek let out a tired sigh as he scanned the notifications. Multiple level-ups had been registered. He muttered inwardly that there went his original plan of slowly clearing low-level dungeons alongside Thomas. He rubbed his forehead, thinking bitterly that he might be the first person in existence genuinely annoyed at leveling up too quickly. At that moment, a faint sound came from the sofa. Reina stirred. Her eyes slowly opened, and she winced as awareness returned. She tried to sit up, immediately asking about the village in a weak voice. Derek reacted instantly, telling her to lie back down. He informed her calmly that the village was safe. Hearing that, Reina relaxed visibly, sinking back into the cushions with relief. Derek gave a small smile and remarked that if she wanted to thank him, there was no need. According to him, he hadn't really done anything. He added dryly that the nobles had simply died on their own. One moment they were alive, and the next, they weren't. Reina grabbed the edge of the sofa in alarm, reminding him that those people had been nobles. What happened was serious. If word of the spread, the entire village, Derek cut her off. He stated firmly that no one would find out. He explained that he already had an idea of what needed to be done. Reina only had to make sure that everyone in the village kept their mouths shut. He added that it shouldn't be difficult. After all, every single villager knew exactly what would happen if they didn't. Sometime later, Leon entered Reina's chamber along with several others from the village. Their expressions were tense but resolute. Leon reported that everything had been handled as Derek instructed. The corpses of the nobles had been moved into the adjacent room and concealed properly. The carriage drivers had also been rounded up. Each of them had been forced to swear an oath to the Great System, binding them to silence regarding everything they had witnessed. Derek nodded and thanked him. Inwardly, he noted that he would later store the bodies inside his storage bracelet, once the timing was right. At that moment, Richard stepped forward hesitantly. His voice trembled as he admitted that he knew he had no right to ask anything. After all, if Derek had not acted, Reina would already be dead. Still, he could not see a way for the village to escape the consequences of what had happened. Richard added bitterly that if Derek had listened to him and spared Wallace, none of this might have occurred. Derek replied calmly that he already had a plan. However, he made it clear that he could not carry it out alone. He would need need the cooperation of everyone present in the room, and ultimately, the cooperation of the entire village. Turning to Richard, Derek asked how long he believed it would take before a noble house or the Adventurers Guild came to investigate. Richard admitted that he could not say for certain. At best, they might have a few weeks. At worst, only a few days. Derek considered this carefully. He then stated that if they were fortunate enough to have a few weeks, the plan would proceed as follows. First, Reina would call for a village meeting. Every villager would need to understand exactly what was at stake. The official story would be that Wallace Graceful had come to the village, obtained the dungeon map from Richard, and then departed immediately to clear the dungeon. Everyone would need to remember, and repeat, that Wallace and his party had barely spent any time in the village at all. Derek then apologized to Richard directly. For this plan to work, the dungeon map would have to be destroyed or lost permanently. Richard responded without hesitation that the map meant nothing if sacrificing it kept the village safe. Derek then stated that before proceeding any further, he would need oaths from everyone in the room. Leon asked what the oath would entail. Derek explained that it would be the same oath Thomas had sworn before traveling with him, an oath never to reveal Derek's secrets unless explicitly permitted. Leon immediately refused. He apologized but stated that he could not bind himself in such a way. While he believed Derek to be honorable, he had seen firsthand what nobles could do to people who were trapped by vows and contracts. Richard then spoke up, saying that he would swear the oath if necessary, though he admitted that he would strongly prefer not to. From the sofa, Reina, still weak, asked whether Derek would truly keep the village safe if she swore the oath. Derek answered honestly that he would protect the village to the best of his ability. Hearing that, Reina declared that she would swear the oath. Mallory then stated that she did not need an oath to protect the secrets of her friends, but if Derek required it, she would swear as well. Brandy, clinging close by, added that if Thomas had sworn the oath, then she would do the same. Derek thanked everyone who was willing to swear and acknowledged those who could not. He stated that even those who refused could remain and hear the plan for now. Moments later, the oaths were enacted. Reina, Mallory, and Brandy were bound under the authority of the gate system, their silence enforced until death. Afterward, Reina, now officially acting as village chief, asked what Derek's plan truly was. Derek smiled faintly, saying that he was glad she had asked, because now they would begin. He laid out the final narrative. Wallace Graceful would be recorded as having entered the village, received the dungeon map from Richard, and led his party into a level 100 dungeon. Thanks to their valiant efforts, the dungeon overflow was suppressed, and the disease threatening the region was contained. However, during the battle, Wallace's entire party was wiped out. Wallace himself suffered a fatal wound from the dungeon boss. Though he managed to escape, he succumbed to his injuries before receiving aid. Wallace Graceful, according to the official account, had given his life as a hero. Derek concluded calmly that this was exactly what every future investigation would uncover. The room fell into silence. After a long moment, all finally asked, almost in disbelief, whether that was truly the entire plan. The following morning, preparations were complete. The group gathered at the village entrance, ready to set out for the dungeon that had originally been assigned to Wallace Graceful. Derek stood at the front, checking everyone one last time before departure. He calmly reminded them that they would not be returning to the village for several days and told everyone to make sure they had not forgotten anything important. Reina hesitated before speaking. She admitted that she still did not understand the plan. If Wallace had supposedly died in a level 100 dungeon, then why were they heading toward a level 50 dungeon instead? Derek answered her with a relaxed smile. He explained that once they grew stronger, they would head to the higher level dungeon later. He added that if Reina did not wish to join him, she did not have to. He was more than capable of clearing the dungeon on his own. However, he strongly encouraged everyone to come. This was a rare opportunity, he explained, one that would allow them to grow stronger together while obtaining valuable rewards that would otherwise be out of reach. As they began moving, Derek added casually that there were also a few things he wanted to test. Inwardly, his thoughts turned serious. From everything he had observed about the new system so far, a person's experiences before level 10 played a massive role in determining the classes they were offered later. The early stages mattered far more than people realized. His gaze shifted briefly toward Brandy. If his theory was correct, then she might be eligible for something truly special. Mallory, still confused, asked why they were clearing lower-level dungeons while Derek stayed outside instead of fighting alongside them. Derek simply winked and told her to trust him. He assured her that she would understand soon enough. Then, with a completely straight face, he added that he would be carrying all of them for these runs and that they would need to move quickly. Both Mallory and Thomas froze in shock. Before anyone could protest, Derek suddenly lifted Brandy and placed her securely on his shoulders. She blinked in confusion, completely unprepared for what came next. Without warning, Derek burst forward at full speed. Reina shouted from behind, demanding to know why he always insisted on running everywhere. But her voice quickly faded as the group was forced to sprint after him. Not long after, they arrived at the level 50 dungeon. The dungeon's glowing crystal hovered ominously in the air, radiating a steady pulse of energy. Derek slowed to a stop and looked up at it, announcing that they had finally arrived. They crossed the bridge leading to the dungeon entrance. Thomas, gasping for breath, complained that his legs felt like jelly and that he could barely walk anymore. Ignoring the complaints, Derek reached out and placed his hand on the dungeon crystal. He reminded everyone that they had all sworn an oath not to reveal his secrets. Now, he said, it was time to understand why that oath had been necessary. One by one, everyone touched the crystal. The system responded instantly, displaying the levels of all participants. Reina's eyes widened in shock. She turned sharply toward Derek and demanded to know why his level was only 30, lower than hers. It made no sense, especially after everything she had witnessed him do. Derek's smile widened slightly. He explained that this was one of his greatest secrets, and the exact reason he had demanded an oath from everyone. Reina insisted that it was insane and demanded to know how it was possible. Derek calmly told her that one day he would explain everything, but not today. For now, they needed to focus. As the dungeon crystal began to shine brighter, the system announced the countdown. After some time, the dungeon transfer completed. The group found themselves inside the dungeon, taking shelter in what appeared to be an abandoned house. The structure was old, but intact enough to serve as a temporary safe house. Derek stood near a torn curtain, carefully peeking outside while observing the movements of monsters roaming the area. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp and focused. Once he had seen enough, he turned back toward the others and announced that it was time to make a plan. He explained his strategy plainly. First, he would head outside alone and weaken a group of monsters, beating them to the brink of death without killing them. Then he would drag those monsters back to the safe house, where Thomas and Mallory would finish them off. This process, he said, would be repeated over and over until both of them reached level 30. Mallory listened carefully as Derek added that once she hit level 25, she should thoroughly review all of her class upgrade options before making a decision. Turning to Thomas, Derek mentioned that he already knew what he needed to do and that there was no need to repeat it. Thomas grimaced and replied that he understood. He did not need to choose a dagger class. Derek then addressed Reina, stating that she should be strong enough to fight outside alongside him. However, if she ran into any trouble, she was to retreat immediately back to the safe house. Derek assured her that he would handle her situation the same way he planned to handle Thomas and Mallory's training. At that moment, Brandy raised her hand and pointed to herself, asking what her role would be. Derek calmly replied that she would be doing nothing. Her expression fell for a brief moment, until Derek continued. He explained that her task would be to practice working with monster hides. She would be handling the materials from every monster they killed. Brandy's mood instantly brightened. Next, Derek glanced toward Mallory's weapon and asked if it was the best one she had available. Mallory admitted that it was. She explained that common classes and decent weapons were hard to obtain in the village. The strongest warriors received priority, while everyone else made do with whatever remained. Without another word, Derek summoned his storage and dumped a pile of weapons onto the floor. Swords, spears, and even an AR-type firearm. Mallory froze in shock. She picked one up and asked how Derek even had so many weapons. Derek answered casually that he had collected them over the years and never really used most of them. He then selected a spear from the pile and handed it to Mallory, telling her to try it. He explained that it was similar to what she had used before, but far more versatile and significantly higher in quality. As Derek began instructing her on how to grip and maneuver the spear properly, chaos erupted behind him. Thomas had grabbed the AR gun and accidentally pressed down on it. Reina and Brandy panicked instantly. Derek reacted without hesitation, grabbing Thomas by the collar and lifting him off the ground in one smooth motion. Without even turning around, he continued explaining spear techniques to Mallory, reminding her to also carry a few daggers as backup. Thomas, dangling in the air, panicked and asked if he could have a dagger too. Derek glanced at him and asked calmly whether Thomas truly wanted to ask that question. Then he answered it himself. Thomas would be using a spear. Once all preparations were complete, Derek and Reina stepped outside the safe house. Waiting for them were 3 massive monsters, orc-like in appearance, their bodies covered in thick muscle and coarse hide. The largest among them, clearly the leader, let out a thunderous growl that echoed across the ruined streets. Derek smiled faintly. He remarked that this was going to be fun. The 3 monsters charged at them at full speed. Reina reacted instantly, releasing a burst of wind magic that tore through the air and disrupted their formation, catching the monsters off guard. Before they could recover, Derek moved. He seized 2 of the monsters by their heads and slammed them together with overwhelming force. Both creatures collapsed instantly. Without wasting a second, Derek dragged them back toward the safe house. Inside, Thomas raised the AR gun, ready to finish them off, but Brandy suddenly snatched the weapon from his hands and fired, delivering the killing blow to the first monster. At the same time, Mallory drove her spear down into the second monster's chest, finishing it cleanly. Outside, the battle continued. Reina cut down the remaining monster with precise sword strikes, her movement steady and confident. Derek assisted by grabbing the creature by its leg and slamming it into the ground repeatedly until it lost consciousness. By evening, Derek stood atop a pile of unconscious monsters, surveying the results. He remarked that the plan seemed to be working. Turning to Reina, he praised her. stating that she had done excellent work. Back inside the safe house, Thomas and Mallory delivered the final blows to the remaining monsters. Moments later, their status windows updated. Both had reached level 25. Mallory stared at her window in disbelief, quietly admitting that she had never thought she would live to see this day.